Bay. We're going to be learning about history today. And the U.S. foreign policy post-Cold War region.
Today we're going to be talking about the history of the Cold War. Alright, we're going to split the history of the Cold War into certain pieces to make it easier for you to understand, right? So, the first piece is going to be containment. Containment is a keyword, definition, plan, whatever you want to call it. But it was something that the U.S. officials in high rank in the United States created. This plan was supposed to keep Russia or the Soviet Union in its area, basically. Due to World War II, the Soviet Union conquered a lot of land. Well, not conquered, actually. They just became in control of a lot of land, mostly in Eastern Europe. This was because these countries or pieces of land were in devastation, political devastation, economical devastation, and social devastation, right? So these countries, the US, the Soviet Union, and the other allies took care of these places, basically. They stood in control. Meanwhile, these countries basically rebuilt themselves, right? But the only thing is that, well, the Soviet Union is communist, and, well, they were infecting, per se, or putting towards their ideas forcibly into these pieces of land. So it was communist, basically. And the US has a huge fear of communism. Therefore, the US created the containment plan. So the communism of the US has a huge fear of communism. Therefore, the US created the containment plan. So the communism of the Soviet Union stays inside the Soviet Union and not into new territories. The second piece of this historical situation is the atomic age. The atomic age is a branch of the arms race. The arms race was a time period where the Soviet Union and the United States were basically battling each other or racing against each other to who could have the most amount of weapons and who could have the highest technologically advanced weapons. Therefore, this stemmed also to the atomic age. The atomic age was a race between the United States and the Soviet Union to who could have the most amount of quantity and quality of both atomic bombs, right? So this created a cycle. Many officials and scientists suggested to the United States to combat the Soviet Union's creation and technological advancing of the atomic bomb. Therefore, they countered it by also the US creating more and higher technologically advanced and quality than the Soviet Union. Therefore, they're balancing each other out or counteracting each other. So this created a cycle where there was a mass production of atomic bombs, there was technological advancements, and this was a cycle that, well, was never going to actually end well.
Speaking of bettering themselves, between Soviet Union and the United States, it was what extends to space. The Soviet Union were the first to launch a satellite into orbit, and it was called Sputnik. This sparked the first race to space. Then, a quote from the president JFK, he quoted that in 1969, the United States would be the first to land on the moon. Fast forward, now 2022, we can assure you that in 1969, the United States were the first to land into the moon, putting the United States flag into the moon, which were the first people to land, which was Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong.
So this vicious cycle, this competition between the United States and the Soviet Union was getting out of control. Arms race, who could have the most, who could have the highest technologically advanced, who controlled the most amount of land, it was just a disaster. But no one actually declared war on each other, which makes the situation even more complicated than it actually is. Because, well, you can't end the war without starting a war, basically. So it was like kind of a weird situation. But let's first start talking about, if you didn't know, that Germany was basically two countries, right? It was split by this Iron Wall or Berlin Wall or whatever name you know it by. But it was basically a wall that split Germany from a more democratic and more controlled by other allies except the Soviet Union, to the other side, which was communist, controlled by the Soviet Union. So, since there was no war declared, there was nothing that you actually could end, but there was big uprisings, and the U.S. was helping the other side of the Berlin Wall, the one that was controlled by the Soviet Union, right? So, this led to many revolts, and to fast forward a little bit, it ended up with the Berlin Wall breaking down, per se. There was revolts, and people just picked it apart. And this was basically the end of the Cold War, because it was a symbolism, basically. It was a symbolism that this vicious cycle of just competing against each other, we just wanted to end it, right? And the Berlin Wall falling marked this time where the Cold War technically ended. You thought we were gone. Now we're going to talk about NATO.
Alright, so first of all, what is NATO? NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So, the NATO was formed in 1949, which started by the signing of the Washington Treaty. It is a security alliance of 30 countries that spans from North America to Europe. This is to help a variety of countries and even states to become the highest part of security there is in the whole entire world.
Right. So now that we know that this was created in the Washington Conference in 1949 and it's supposed to make countries safer, well, what's their action, right? Their action is, well, helping out. So how did they help out? They helped out by intervening in the Cold War, right? They saw that there was conflicts going, and NATO was responsible for officially trying to not declare war between the US and the Soviet Union, but trying to resolve it. And because of the Cold War, and after there was many other conflicts like Yugoslavia, Bosnia, and there was also the Afghan War, the Iraq War, and many other wars that came after, and NATO was all part of it. NATO's responsibility was to basically stop this from growing into a bigger problem, right? And this is the main goal of NATO: stopping problems, resolving it, and creating the highest level of security for countries and states. And this is exactly what they did. They helped out Russia and the United States iron out their issues and, well, not lead into a war, right?
Yeah.
Ah, you thought we were gone. Not again. We're back, babe. And today, this time, we're going to be talking about U.S. foreign policy.
But before we talk about the U.S. foreign policy, we're going to talk about NATO's involvement in the Yugoslavic wars. So, first of all, the primary decision why they were involved was because of the mass genocide that happened mostly in Bosnia and Herzegovina. This was the reason because they depleted the Bosniaks and the Bosnian Muslims.
Right. So, well, what was NATO's change throughout this whole entire process? Well, let me tell you, NATO hasn't changed. It's still with the sole purpose of intervening in conflicts, saving the world, because they technically don't have any power, but they technically do, right? So they continued helping out with treaties and conflicts all around the world, stopping from us entering basically into World War III, and the secret purpose: stopping communism from spreading, right? All right, now we're gonna talk about the U.S. transition in its foreign policy, right? So the U.S. changed into a more difficult time and era into its foreign policy, right? Because the U.S. had already gone through World War II, and, well, if you don't know, soon there's going to be a few more wars, and, well, we're entering in this time of era where it's controversial, right? But the U.S. foreign policy changed to a passive-aggressive type of foreign policy, right? Because the U.S. is not looking for a reason to get into a war, but if they find a reason, if they see one, they will get involved. And that's why, next of all, we're going to talk about the Middle East and 9/11.
Starting off with the conflict on the Middle East. So, the conflict that happened primarily was fighting terrorism. And the U.S. was involved because they did not want the whole world to be influenced by terrorism and the entire economy of the United States and even the entire world. So the conflict was to fight mostly Al-Qaeda, thanks to 9/11. 9/11 was an attack in the Twin Towers to the US directly from Al-Qaeda, a terrorist group. And the terrorist group caused the 2001 president, which was George Bush, call on war to the Taliban, basically in Iraq and Afghanistan, which caused the US to go war. And now Biden pulled off. Fast forward to 2022, 2021, Biden took away soldiers and took them home to the United States to end up the final conflict.
Alright, so we've gone through it, a very interesting piece and section of US history. And this all happened in the 1900s, so it's actually pretty recent. And you can see how much history can be compacted in such a small piece of time. We went from getting into a secret war that no one actually declared war on each other with the Soviet Union, that nowadays has a completely different name, which is Russia right now. And now we went and transitioned into conflict with terrorism, and we're trying to save the world, but without getting involved with the world. So it's just been a very conflicting time in US history. But we're current day in the United States and we're fine. We've combated terrorism, we've combated communism, and we've gone past it. And like my partner here just said, we just retrieved our troops from the Middle East and we brought them back home. Although it's a very controversial topic, it is what it is. And it marks a new time in history for better change and new foreign policy. Thank you again, and come back for another video so you could get your brain cows milked and learn more about history.
Make sure you subscribe.
Bye.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, babe? Today we're going to be learning about history today.
Today we're going to be talking about
To continue
Which
I know I have